Again, welcome everyone. It's great to see so many of you out on this beautiful summer evening. Today I want to talk about a very important question and really delve into this in some detail. I was going to do a talk about investigation or inquiry. I had somebody in the group ask me about that, and so I started reflecting on it. And I really came to the conclusion that I might be coming at this backwards. that learning all these methods and processes of investigation and inquiry may not do us all that much good if we're not really clear on why we're doing it. So I want to ask you to really to ask yourself, what is the most important thing to you? What's the most important thing? Because in many ways our spiritual growth, if we want to call it that, is hindered because we want the goodies that living as a separate self offer. Right? They may be what is important to us. So is the new Tesla more important than something deeper, or fill in the blank? Really look, because you will invest energy or effort into what's viewed as most important. So today I want to really delve into and talk about how you can look and see what's the most important thing to you in your life, and what are the implications of this for your spiritual practice, and in particular, how you carry out investigation or inquiry. The investigation inquiry that's directed at answering the most important question. So as I said, I've given lots of talks in the past about the processes and methods of investigation and inquiry, and I would say the usual things, such as it's not an intellectual exercise, but rather a continuous looking inward at your direct experience to see if you can find an I or a me or a self. But is that really what's behind all this? Perhaps I'm coming at it backwards. Perhaps there's something we really need to establish before we jump into investigation. So perhaps it's not the methods of investigating that are so important, but rather the questions that we hold that are important. And I really noticed in my personal journey that, I was, at the beginning, I was involved in the Dharma, and I was going to meditations, and it was important, but it wasn't the most important thing. It wasn't until it became the most important thing that I was putting the majority of my energy and effort into investigating and inquiring into those deep questions. So in this talk, I want to help each of you dig deep within yourself and discover what is your most important thing. And once you know what your most important thing is, your most important question, investigation has a potential, a power on its own. It really kind of naturally arises. It brings clarity. It brings precision to your investigation. And from the guided meditation, you might see that investigation or inquiry is really not all that difficult. It's kind of a simple process of turning away from our usual fascination with the content of our experience and stepping turning toward our presence or our essential being. So I think investigation doesn't happen for two main reasons. It doesn't have the power and the potential for two main reasons. First, seeing truth has not been established as what's most important to us. And the second one that I would add in there that I won't talk today about is we believe in many cases the resistance of the egoic mind that's only really concerned with what it wants and avoiding its demise. But let's start with the first one. What holds the utmost importance for you above all else? Is it awakening? Is it love? Is it peace? Or is it something else that brings inspiration, peace, and joy? And when I mention meaning, I'm not referring to theoretical or abstract meanings, but rather your deepest, you could say, existential question. And once we know the most important question, investigation will naturally begin, will easily continue, and will grow stronger. So you may be wondering what I mean by the most important thing to you. You might want to try thinking of it this way. When physical death is imminent for you, what would be the one thing that you would want fulfilled, realized, or brought to understanding? When death is imminent, what would be the most important thing for you just before your physical death? So if you could kind of almost imagine that. This is what I mean by digging deep and finding out what's your most important thing. The egoic mind will prioritize all kinds of things that ultimately don't fulfill us, right? Such as, wealth, fame, status, pursuing pleasure. And often at some point in our life, sometimes later in life, when we've achieved enough, we realize that those things don't ultimately bring peace. And we begin to seek what truly matters to us. There's a point where this happens, where we're not as entangled or enthralled or interested in these things. I often ask people about their spiritual life and aspirations. And many people will say things like, oh, I'm interested in enlightenment, or I'm interested in awakening. And I always like to probe deeper and ask them to define what they mean by those things. What do the terms mean to them? I'm not interested in concepts. I'm not interested in concepts about eternal happiness or a perfect life. Instead, I want to know their true yearnings and what holds the utmost importance for them. So I encourage you to discover the most important thing in life. And it's important to contemplate this deeply rather than jumping at the first idea that comes to mind. It may take time and practice to get at the heart of what truly matters, but it's worth the effort. And nobody else can give you the answer. It's something that belongs to you alone. Each person defines it for themselves, and this requires taking time to look, and it may often require meditation. So a key to an effective or fruitful investigation lies in the questions that we ask. not the kinds of questions with easy answers, but the ones that lead us to a profound inner exploration. And it's not the kind of meaning that you can define with words or logic or the mind. It's about something deeper, a feeling, a sensing into the aliveness, the presence that's within. And sensing into that can only be found by asking the right questions. And the questions may seem paradoxical because the immediate answers we give ourselves are often conditioned by our upbringing, culture, surroundings, the wants and not wants of the egoic mind. But by taking the time to truly examine what's most important and to look deep inside ourselves, we open ourselves to a whole new level of understanding and growth. So what are the right questions? Well, that's up to each of us to discover for ourselves. And I think it starts with asking ourselves, what is the most important thing to you? And be willing to challenge the answers that we may have been conditioned to accept based on old beliefs, ideas that may actually make us feel safe or secure. Right? These are maybe ideas that give us that sense of safety, and maybe that's why we hold on to them. But they come at the expense of truly living. So the cost of not asking these kinds of insightful questions is a life living out our habitual patterns, right? Being driven by our conditioning, being driven by what I sometimes call the consensus reality that everyone follows without even actually realizing it. You know, what Jon Kabat-Zinn calls being on autopilot. So we must be willing to go deeper and explore the deepest, most fundamental truths within ourselves. And in doing so, discover a level of meaning and purpose that transcends the limitations of language, of description, of logic, of the mind. And when we know the most important thing, we'll continually explore it. We won't get sidetracked by wants and aversions of the psychological self. We constantly get sidetracked if we don't know that this is the most important thing. I know I've been there, done that. In fact, it could be the most important thing for me for a little while, and then I might feel, I would feel I'm not progressing. So then I'd get sidetracked and I'd, look for the shiny objects, as I used to call them, the egoic wants and not wants, the wants and desires and aversions of the psychological self. It's just what happens. And I'm simply pointing this out because by hearing me talk about this, you might go, here it is. I'm being sidetracked from what's most important to me. So even once we've perhaps identified what's most important, to be aware when we get sidetracked. And when we really I found that when I really looked and discovered what was most important at the very deepest level, and spent the time contemplating that and knowing that I became less and less prone to getting sidetracked. So I'm kind of calling this a motivated inquiry, right? It's immersing yourself in what truly matters, right? Often our intellectual curiosity, it can involve intellectual exploration, right? It arises out of an intellectual curiosity. But discovering what is genuinely important can really prevent, us from pursuing a lifetime of pursuing other people's expectations or what someone else thinks we should pursue. When something holds profound importance, it becomes kind of intertwined with our being. It breaks through those protective barriers of the egoic mind that hinders insights and realizations. When we're inquiring into what truly matters to us, we persevere. We don't get sidetracked. And the exploration might lead us to bliss, or it might lead us to confusion. It might lead us to doubt. We may feel like we're not progressing. We may feel like we're losing control. We may feel disoriented. But when we know that what we're engaged in is what genuinely matters to us, we'll persist. So fear will come up. The egoic mind's a master at creating fear. Fear will come up as we break through the illusions of the egoic self. Right? Remember, that's what the egoic mind does. Above all else, it fears its demise. And it will put up strong resistance. And we can make this part of the investigation. We can accept and look deeply at the resistance. And we can look at what is it that is resisting? What is it that knows that resistance is happening? If you want to take it a step deeper. So it's not about having an experience, seeking a kind of an external experience of bliss or whatever you might have, kind of, if you have a conceptual formulation of what might happen. It's not about seeking that. It's not about replicating other people's journeys as a form of inquiry. True inquiry simply guides us right back around to ourselves, to our own unique experience, our own unique animation of beingness. So it immerses us in the present moment of life emerging and drawing us into the mystery of that, of our very existence. That question, the question, what am I? That directs us to the true nature of our being. And of course, the mind, which wants a conceptual answer, eventually recognizes its lack of an answer. This is really when things stop. the mind can't grasp it. Again and again it may try, but it can't. And this is where the mind just stops. But we continue to ask the question. As I've sometimes said, you kind of float these questions out into beingness, rather than trying to figure it out through analysis. And when the mind is honest, it realizes, there's no answer. There's no answer that can be grasped. So it brings that kind of the silence. When the mind stops, there's instant silence, leaving the mind in this kind of state of not knowing. And in that silence, really an encounter with emptiness, an encounter with suchness, the isness of life emerges. And the answers don't appear as a new narrative, a description, a new conceptual framework, an ontology, whatever the other words, a paradigm. It's a direct realization. Our beingness, our essence, it transcends all words and intellectual explanations. Our being constantly transcends itself beyond even the most profound insights. And eventually the inquiry exhausts itself, along with exhausting the ego and exhausting the witness. And eventually, and I always use this snowball metaphor, but eventually, like a snowball, we kind of unravel faster than we can reconstruct ourselves, if that makes sense. The self, the witness, disentangles, it unravels faster than we can, then the ego can kind of rebuild itself. And we ultimately know truth or reality. As Nisargadatta brilliantly put it, the ultimate understanding is that there is no ultimate understanding.